in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to thank you for shopping locally. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. It means the world to us. We would not be here the last year or the last 50 years without you. So thank you so much for that, as it is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary. And we are very, very lucky to have our brand new location located in McGregor Square, which is right across the street from Coors Field. And we are celebrating that new relationship by celebrating the All-Star game, which is incredible that it's now in Denver. We're so excited as two local institutions at the Colorado Rockies and Tattered Cover Bookstore. We are thrilled to be hosting a series of amazing events with incredible guests, all about baseball, books, which relate more than you think they would. And so today we have a fantastic panel that we've titled Locked Out. And I want to encourage everyone to talk in the chat, and listen, take notes. This also is going to be recorded, so if you miss any part of it, you can join us on our YouTube channel and watch any of the past events on there as well, and check out the future ones at tatteredcover.com/event. So now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for the evening, Melissa Ludtke, and I'm going to pop out of the screen here and turn it over to her. Hello, Melissa.
Hi, how are you? I've been a customer at Tattered Cover. I love the bookstore. I have great friends who live nearby your old location, and I have
thank you.
Wonderful yellow socks and a few books, and it's a wonderful. And anytime we can support an independent bookstore, I'm there.
Oh, so, it means the world to us. Well, I'm going to let you take it from here and introduce our fabulous panelists.
I will.
Thank you all again.
I'm going to hold off on the introductions until we begin our conversation. I really do want this to be a conversation. So let me start. I'm Melissa Ludtke. I used to be a baseball reporter with Sports Illustrated, and know that when I say used to, that means my time around baseball, about 4 decades in the rearview mirror. So I'm grateful to be moderating this conversation among these remarkable women who are still telling us the stories of baseball. So there's one word I want you to keep in mind, and it's not diamond. I know we think of baseball diamonds today, we're thinking circle, the circle of the life that you see in front of you, the then and the now, personified by our panel members, as together we dip into a half a century in which women reporters have made inroads into what was, and arguably continues to be, a bastion of patriarchal attitudes, behaviors, and vision. Our time together is brief, so let me start out spinning our circle of conversation. I'm going to introduce a couple of thematic prompts, and then I'm going to invite each of our illustrious speakers to weigh in. Okay, here's the good news. Each of these women is extremely skilled at conveying their thoughts, their relevant experiences in concise, wonderful languages with active verbs. So in keeping with their responses being brief, we're going to have a chance to learn a lot from them in our short time together. And I will do the brief bios to our speakers as I call them into our first round of responses. So let's get started. And it's kind of fun to start this way because I found a review of our panel member, Jane Leavy's novel, Squeeze Play. It's about a woman baseball reporter. I won't go into much more depth, but you could probably find it in the Tattered Cover. The New York Times described her book as a book where sex is a metaphor for baseball. And in the review that Grace Lichtenstein did of it, she exposed what she said then was a dirty little secret about women as sports writers. This would go for sports broadcasters too. So here's Grace's secret. And when I was talking with Jane this morning, she said, Grace kind of borrowed that secret from the actual book itself. So I will give credit to both Grace and Jane as I say it. Grace wrote, "Women make better sports writers than men. They don't come to sports writing with false illusion about knowing baseball better than the players. They ask better questions and they probe more sensitive areas than run, catch, and throw. So, since I'm joined by women who personify this dirty little secret, let's start with a round of reactions from each panel member to Grace's premise. And let me up the ante here where I began. So, my question to each of you is, what is it that makes women better sports writers and better sports broadcasters than men? We'll accept nuance in these responses. So if you don't feel comfortable in claiming superiority, then speak to the strengths that each of us bring or argue that gender has nothing to do with sports writing. So of course, I'm going to lead off with Squeeze Play's author, Jane Leavy, who as a girl idealized the baseball players who she grew up to write about. Mickey Mantle, Sandy Koufax, along with her spectacular book, The Big Fella on Babe Ruth. But perhaps most pertinent to the question at hand is an essay that Jane wrote that she entitled The Phallic Fallacy. You can Google it if you want to read it later. But for now, I want to quote to you what Jane said as I lead into what I'm eager to hear is what I'm sure will be a provocative response. Jane wrote, when I became a sports writer in 1977, the unstated goal was to write lean, mean, macho prose. We couldn't make ourselves invisible in the locker room, so we tried to make ourselves invisible in our writing. How many times did I dare my friends to remove the byline from my stories and try to find any place where my words sounded like they were written by a girl? We weren't supposed to acknowledge the differences that gender might produce, much less flaunt them. But the truth is, women in the locker room do see things differently, and I don't mean anatomically. We come to sports with different assumptions and experiences. We are outsiders, which is what reporters are supposed to be. The femininity we sought to hide is actually our greatest asset, our X-ray vision. So if you want, Jane, go to it. Feed off of the words that you wrote in your book, Squeeze Play, and give us your sense of where you see this.
I'm not going to start with the lead, which I'm still being castigated for in many locker rooms across America, but that's okay. I'm glad you read that, and thank you. Yeah, I think the advantage really is that we're outsiders. And from the get-go, we're not trying. I mean, how many times have we all stood around lockers and listened to some Yahoo guy from some podunk radio station say, well, that was a, red dot slider, right? I threw a red dot slider in high school. Come on. You don't have to be a president to write about the president, as Chelsea has demonstrated amply and extremely well. You don't have to have played Major League Baseball to be able to ask the right questions and to do what reporters are trained to do. But the advantage we do have, and it is, of course, also sometimes problematic, is that we're outsiders. And you don't go into it expecting to fit in. You don't go in expecting to be pals. You don't go in expecting certainly not to sleep with them, God knows. You go in expecting to ask the questions that elicit the answers and the information, usually and often under difficult circumstances that you need to write your story. And the part that Grace, and I didn't remember the review, so thank you. The part that Grace didn't mention that's in that same part of the book is where I say that there's maybe one guy per 24-man roster, which shows how old the book is, that knows that the issue is not being seen, i.e. being naked. It's being seen for who you are. Mm-hmm. And that I have always believed is the thing that makes us as female reporters and observers most dangerous to them and most scary. That's what they don't want. And that, it is also definitely an advantage. I mean, this is really old stuff, but I remember the Orioles, when I was covering them, letting me sit, because I was too stupid to know better, through a long rain delay in the dugout with Al Bumbry, who was telling me about his speech impediment and how he grew up on the wrong side of the tracks and the divorce and the this and the that and the next thing. And now his daughter had developed a speech impediment. I guarantee you he wasn't telling any guy about that. And I can tell you stories that Lori Mifflin and Robin Herman are, the great pioneers of women journalists in sports, learned because they were willing to listen and able to ask and were trusted in a way sometimes that men were not. Because it isn't always what you can write. It's sometimes what you don't write. It's what you know isn't true. That a guy may tell you off the record, don't write that. And so you can't, but you're not going to be inaccurate by writing something that sometimes other people will write. I am honored to be among you. Thank you.
Gotten us off to a great start, and I'm going to turn now to Suzyn Waldman. I'm reminded, as you mentioned, people like Robin Herman and Lori Mifflin. These are our generation, and of course, we're going to come to the younger voices among us soon. I have not forgotten any of you. But Suzyn has been an incredible pioneer, a female voice of the Yankees. She would like it to be just the voice of the Yankees, but I'm making it for this panel the female voice of the Yankees. She's now in her 16th season. She joined the radio broadcast team in 2005 after working in what I'd call the elbow sharp environment of New York sports radio for 15 years, climbing her way through against great odds, hitting speed bumps and barriers and finding her way around them. And we are just so fortunate that she has been in that broadcast booth for the last 15 years, now the 16th year, sharing stories about this team ever since. So Suzyn, weigh in after Jane, and welcome.
Thank you. And this is fabulous. And I'm a little after Jane, and I remember that first sentence, and we won't go into that right now. You got a lot of trouble. You've gotten a lot of trouble for that.
Visitor will never forgive me.
She will never forgive you. She doesn't forget it to this day. But here's what I found really, really early. And I always used the example. There are hundreds of thousands of obstetricians in this country that are male, and they've never had a baby, and they do just fine delivering babies. What I learned about covering sports in my first year with the Yankees was 1987. And what I learned really fast is that once they trust you and once they know that you're not a moron and you know what to ask, you can ask stuff that a guy can't. My first example of that was years and years and years ago with Rickey Henderson. And I'm brought up to that because Alex just did an article on him. And I learned really fast that I could go to Rickey and say, why did you swing at that pitch? And he'll tell me, because I'm not in competition with him. I'm asking a question. If a guy goes over to Rickey and said, why did you try and steal that base? The answer invariably would be, why? What would you have done? You know better than me. And so as long as you're there, and it's kind of a dirty little secret, use being feminine, use it, but make sure that they know that one, they can trust you, and two, they know if you're an idiot as soon as you open your mouth. They don't have to wait around to see. And as soon as you do, then you get that trust. And Jane brought up trust, and that is the most important thing. And women get tested. I've been tested. This is my 35th year doing this. My first radio game was 1992. That's a long time ago between doing your first group and getting the job in 2005. And I was there the whole time, but it's trust, and it's knowing. It's not even knowing your place. It's knowing who you are and what you bring to this game. I think fans want to know why Rickey swung at that. What did he see? Does he not feel well? Is he upset about something? Has the manager yelled at him? Did Lou Piniella yell at him? I mean, those are the kinds of things that guys either are afraid of doing, or they don't care about, or they want to show that they're big, tough writers. And that's what I think. So use it, but make sure it's used correctly.
Great. All right, now we're going to test these theories that Jane and Suzyn from our generation have put on the table with a younger perspective. And I'm going to turn to Alex Coffey at this point, who is currently a freelance baseball writer, covers other sports as well, but we're calling her baseball writer for today. She describes her output as, quote, human interest stories. So we're at a bookstore. We're convened by a bookstore. So let me just read for you, as a little bit of an introduction, the opening paragraphs of a terrific story she wrote about relief pitcher Corey Guerin, who actually, in the course of her story, cites lessons he's learned to apply to baseball from The Great Gatsby. So let me just give you a little bit of an understanding of Alex and how she comes at stories before I invite her to come in and talk to this question. She begins her story with a quote. "I think great bookstores reflect the population, the cities they're in," Corey Girwin says, a very soon-to-be Yankee reliever tells me. "It's an overcast recent Friday morning and we're standing in the middle of the Elliott Bay Book Company, contemplating where to begin in a space that's akin to a corn maze for literature. Guerin, who comes to the Elliott Bay every homestand, says the books normally find him. So we decide to float. In more ways than one, bookstores and books represent different stages in Guerin's life. Elliott Bay is no exception. It was the first place that he and his wife, Maddie, visited in the 2018 off season when Corey was a free agent trying to decide on his next destination. They walked past rows of books packed like sardines in a can, accompanied by reviews handwritten with love. They felt the warmth of the natural light that poured in through the building's oval windows, and they heard the churning of espresso machines, and they knew they'd found home. Alex, join us in this question about why women make better sports writers than men.
Yeah, well, before I do, I think I should mention that Corey has a favorite bookstore in every city where there's a big league baseball team. And his favorite bookstore in Denver happens to be Tattered Covers. So I just thought I would mention that. But as far as this question, after hearing what Jane and Suzyn had to say, it made me think of some advice that I got from a mentor in the industry, just about this notion of vulnerability as a way to kind of secure that trust and how that can be a really important asset as a reporter. And, I had only been on the A's beat for about 2 seasons, but I found that, acknowledging that I don't know everything and showing a desire to learn and ask questions and, no matter how simple or obvious the answer might be, really helps kind of solidify that trust. And, no matter who you're asking, whether it's a player, a coach, a manager, just because it shows a willingness to learn and, to kind of have a deeper understanding of the game. And furthermore, it shows that we don't think that we know everything, because if we did, we would have those jobs, right? So I think that's kind of the insight that I have to add from that. And that's something that I've really picked up in the seasons I've covered the A's.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to swing back to the broadcast booth now. So that means Jessica Mendoza is up. Okay, most of you know her as a member of ESPN's baseball broadcast team. And like Suzyn, in 2015, Jessica became another pioneer for us as women in baseball. She became the first woman analyst on a network broadcast of a Major League Baseball game through the ESPN. She's also the only member of our panel who's earned both a gold and a silver medal in the Olympics in softball. Now, I don't know, maybe the rest of you have. I haven't seen it in your bios, but right now I'm putting that on Jessica and asking Jessica to join us in this question about why are women better at broadcasting sports than men?
It's interesting. And first of all, I'm so grateful to be on this panel. Like I'm here just taking notes and I forget that I'm participating. So Jane, be able to kind of meet you and listening to you, Suzyn, obviously I picked your brain so much. And then Alex and Chelsea, you guys are badasses and I've always appreciated. And I do feel like we all are so different too, which is, I think, part of that's why I hate gender association, because I do think that, we have our own unique things that we bring. My family is from Mexico. There's a Hispanic part of my lens that I look through a lot of times that isn't even, I would say, a female lens. So there's that added piece. But what's interesting, and I think maybe Suzyn relates to this as well, is, being in this kind of analyst role, a lot of the people that are usually in my seat are ex-Major League Baseball players. And so the difference that I noticed from day one, and this is coming from broadcasting a lot of softball games where, these are my people, you go down, a lot of them are my teammates or my friends. I've known them my whole life. And you start talking to players, and I realized that a lot of the men that were in my seat prior to me, and even currently at times, don't leave the booth because they're big time names. They're celebrities. They're, they're famous. And whether it's navigating to go down on the field or in the clubhouse, or it's above them to maybe, or below them, sorry, to go down to a clubhouse to try to, talk to someone about why they're hitting a certain way, or a pitcher. And that's what I think surprised me. And I realized, gosh, there's a huge deficit in our sport of, like you've played for 20 plus years or 10 plus years and done it. And people do want to hear what you have to say if you're an ex-major leaguer, but what's happening today? Mm-hmm. Like what's happening on the field right now? And so whether that's female or not, I do feel like being able to go down and talk to Mookie Betts right now and ask what's his approach right in this moment versus what I think, being a softball player, when I played. And it just kind of blew me away, to be perfectly honest with you, that there was this concept of a separation between the booth and the field, that they never connected. And I started to see that more and more, especially in my early days in entering into this role. So I kind of got Melissa and was like, okay, like this is something that I'm going to be able to differentiate. I'm going to go and talk to these pitchers and hitters and coaches and find out how this game, because God knows it has changed a ton. I don't care if you retired 3 years ago, like it has changed a ton. And so whether it's female or not, I do feel like I can bring something by just not being like, I'm up here in my booth and I can come down and get to know and then relate that to the people at home that are watching this game.
That's great. Thanks, Jessica. And Chelsea, here we are. I'm going to swing back to the print, and I'm going to introduce the Washington Post, Chelsea James, who's the paper's national baseball writer. For a while, she was the beat writer for the Nationals, but now she is the national baseball writer. So that's not capital national, that's national baseball writer. So she won my heart when I found out for the first time that she wrote about women's crew while she was a reporter and columnist for the Yale Daily News. As a continuing women's crewer, I thought, wow, that doesn't get covered very often. So thank you. And a bunch of other sports. So unfortunately, due to what's happening in baseball these days, she's been writing a lot about sexual harassment and abuse. Most recently about a case involving last season's Cy Young Award-winning pitcher in the National League, Trevor Bauer. So for you, Chelsea, let me add another dimension. And this comes with the observation of a writer from Yahoo Sports, Hannah Kaiser, who this past week described all that she hates about seeing another sexual abuse case coming out of baseball, starting to spin out. And this year, there have been more than a few. Something she wrote about leapt out at me. I want to read it to you and then ask you to kind of give me your thoughts around it. She said, I have to watch as reporters who do the painful, important work are often met with harassment themselves. I hate that the best self-care for compassionate sports writers and fans this week, and so often, is not to read their mentions and to be lucky enough for the details in the news to not track too closely to their own trauma, at least not this time. So if I could ask you to add a dimension in your comments to speaking to the roles that sort of misogyny and sexual harassment and abuse of women who are baseball reporters affects some of the way that you approach the telling of the stories that you are writing. How does being a woman affect the way you come at your coverage of these topics?
It's interesting. I think one thing I've noticed in the last few months, as we've all kind of had to handle this more and more, is I think I thought that it wouldn't make much of a difference. I thought that, I would probably cover Trevor Bauer's accusations in the same way as another, a male writer or somebody else, right? And maybe in print it comes out that way, but what's been really interesting is listening to the questions that get asked. And I'll never forget, in the aftermath of the accusations against Mickey Callaway, there was a press conference that the Cleveland Indians held where, they were talking about the fact that the investigation was over and people were asking their president of baseball operations about that. And a male reporter asked, do you feel vindicated by the fact that you guys weren't implicated as, enabling this or whatever it was, and, you weren't punished for this? And I was just really taken aback by that question and the idea that anyone would feel vindicated in that situation. And this is a really experienced writer. A lot of people really respect him. And I just thought to myself, wow, this is an actual different perspective that I bring. This is not how everyone thinks. Not every reporter. And in fact, I think very few would listen to that question and think, why are you asking if they feel vindicated? And fortunately, Chris Antonetti, had a nice answer for it. But I think that has been sort of the prevailing notion for me, is there are many male reporters who do get it and know how to talk about it. But by and large, people aren't comfortable talking about it. And I think that, I am fortunate enough that I don't have trauma like that in my past. That is, I can't imagine what it would be to write about that, having that fresh in your mind. But even just as a woman, realizing how easy it is for those things to happen, how powerless you can be in those situations really changes the way you come at that. And it's been obvious to me. But I would also be remiss on a slightly different subject to say that part of learning how to trust the fact that I had a different perspective came from the fact that when I was, growing up, I actually had people in these positions like Suzyn Waldman who were in the game and who were, broadcasting or writing about baseball. I mean, it's I'm not exaggerating when I say I listen to the Yankees broadcast every night, and this is a thrill to see Suzyn on Zoom because it's a voice I grew up with. There was always a female voice in my ear. Even when my parents told me to go to bed, I'd turn it back on. And that really matters. And seeing what obviously Jeff Mendoza's been able to do on ESPN, those things, they make people who see them realize, okay, my voice is different, but it's also valuable. It also matters. People want to hear it. And I think particularly on the question of sexual assault, that has been a really valuable thing to remember, that, hey, I might have a different take than some of my male colleagues. And it's more important than ever that I trust myself and ask those questions and try to bring it into the public eye.
That's great. Thank you. We're about halfway through, which works just fine because I've got one other big topic. And so we're going to kind of do the round again, not in the same order. So listen up, no one go to sleep here. I just want to thank all of you for getting this conversation off and rolling. It's just been fascinating. And Jessica, if you can send me your notes, that would be great, because I haven't been able to take any, but I wish I had. Okay, so this time I'm going to start with the opening line, which we all know from Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, he wrote in opening that classic book. So I'm going to ask each of you to apply Dickens' memorable phrase to our own circumstances of being women in baseball. Let me just give a little forward here. Since we invaded baseball in the 1970s, and that word is exactly what the men said we were, invaders of their territory, we've seen changes occur, from equal access being granted to us by the courts, then begrudgingly by baseball's men, slow until they had to women in the broadcast booth. Thank you, Suzyn. Thank you, Jessica. To women writing acclaimed books about the men who play this game. Thank you, Jane. And to the younger woman, thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Alex, who work on the front lines of this sport today. So let's take that word change and then let's add to it the word progress. And I'd like to ask each of you to assess the progress that women reporters and broadcasters have made in baseball, and also address the pace of this change, which in my opinion has been frustratingly slow. Where are the speed bumps that prevent women still from feeling as though they belong in baseball? And this time I'm going to start with Suzyn Waldman, who in a 2019 interview put it bluntly, even now, I'm tolerated and not accepted. In 2020, she elaborated on this in another interview when she repeated, I believe that I'm tolerated and not accepted, and still to this day, they would rather have a guy in the Yankees radio booth. I don't think it has changed fast enough. When we get to the point where someone can be hired and it is not a big deal that it's a woman, then I will be satisfied. So Suzyn, lead us off on this next topic. Help us see, as you do, the place of women in baseball as you consider the words change and progress.
Well, of course, I also think change is not always progress. Before I do that, Chelsea, thank you for that. And Alex, it was your story. You got me an intro when Corey Guerin walked into the locker room. I started quoting the Great Gatsby to him. So immediately I went over to him and I say, Scott Fitzgerald is my favorite, and I did the whole thing about the light at the end of the dock.
Yeah.
And he looked at me differently from the second I did that. And that's the thing that I'm afraid we're losing. And that's change. And that's the way the game is going and what our worth is. And Jane's nodding. And one of the things that is, to me, is being taken away because of the way the game is being played. It's all stats. It's not people. I am there because of my relationships with people for 35 years. And for the last 2 years, those relationships are gone. And my stories stop at 2019 because they're gone, and I'm not sure they're coming back. I don't like what's happening here. But you know, when everybody says it's like what's going on over the summer, and people say, boy, there's change that's happening immediately. But those of us who marched in the 60s, what are you talking about change? I was there. I was burning my bra. I did all of it. And it never changed. Nothing happened. And now I'm looking at this and everybody says, isn't this great? I got a picture of 7 young women in their 20s who are doing minor league baseball games. They sent it to me. I started to cry. It was unbelievable. That's change. But my first game was in 1992. That's a long time ago. And, you know, and that's the thing that is bothersome, which is why what Chelsea's doing is so important. Keep it out there. Make sure that people keep feeling things. Don't let it become stats. And, you know, any idiot can tell you he threw a slider down and away. Why did he throw that? If it didn't work, what happened? And if you can't tell that, the game is going to die. It's not football. It's not basketball. It's humanity being passed down. And I'm glad that Alex and Chelsea and Jessica are there. I mean, I'm glad, but you know, there's a responsibility here too. Don't become those people. You know, the things that women, I'm afraid of this, the things that women bring are not valued anymore. And, you know, every time I hear Jess, I hear that it is because she has a story like that she can tell. And when you come back from the Olympics, you're going to see the greatest group of guys ever on that team. And, you know, Todd Frazier and David Robertson will keep you going for years. And that is going to be so wonderful because that's what baseball is. And I just, you know, it's slow for Jane and Melissa and me. It really is. But you guys are seeing the fruits of it. And hopefully you'll never have to burn your bras. So.
All right. Well, you've set it right up for Chelsea, who I'm going to go to next. So thank you. You didn't know that, but it's a perfect setup. It's like, you know, when the kids are learning how to play baseball and they put the ball right up on the thing right at the plate, and so they can just hit it. You've just put it right there for Chelsea. So Chelsea, it's entirely possible that you do not know what it was like for women like me and Suzyn and Jane when we were viewed as alien invaders by most of the men associated with baseball. So I'm not going to ask you to compare our then to your now. So what I'm going to ask instead is for you to tell us what you think progress should look like for young girls who dream of one day doing the job that you're doing now.
That's a really good question. And it's the first time I've ever been thrown to after a burning bra reference. So I'm reeling a little bit, but it's interesting. I mean, I think part of it is as simple as being able to listen to Suzyn Waldman broadcasting games for a lot of your youth and have that not be strange, and seeing Jessica Mendoza on ESPN and thinking that that's normal. I think that's really, really important because certainly for me, I knew it was different, but it didn't seem impossible. And, you know, I take progress from the fact that there are a lot of women writing about baseball right now, I think more than ever. But there are also women in unprecedented positions in baseball, whether that's, you know, coaches with the Giants, with the Red Sox, Kim A in the front office. I mean, you know, how long did she have to wait to get there when you talk about sort of the pace of progress? And that stuff really matters. And I think, you know, for all the same reasons that, you know, male reporters can sort of buddy up with people in the game and, you know, have these relationships that we sort of never feel like we can, the more women that are in the game, the not the easier our job gets, but it changes. It gives us relationships that are sort of more natural and more organic, and it changes the way you do your job, I think. And so I think for someone in my era, progress is, walking into a draft, availability and talking to a woman about what's happening, or talking to a female hitting coach about what you're seeing. And certainly that's not necessary. I think there's always going to be a lot of men in the game, and earning their respect is very important. But for me, as someone who grew up wanting to play in the major leagues and knowing that would never happen, I think it's really special to see people get as close as they're getting. And I hope that continues to encourage people to feel like this is their game, whether they're male, female, black, white, whatever it is, because it's really special. And it was frankly unthinkable when I was young.
Great. I'm going to turn to Jane next. And I know, Jane, I'm just going to give our listeners a sense that you may have to dart out right on the dot, because you've got a really important interview that you have to do. So I'm glad that I was able to weave you in. This is your spot. So if you have to leave us after this, thank you for everything today. Let me call on you because in an essay you wrote about your childhood idol, Mickey Mantle. You wrote of him, Mantle was the last boy in the last decade ruled by boys. Now, Mantle's 2 decades in baseball ended before most people listening to us today were born in the 1960s. So I'd like you to sort of take off of that and tell us where you see baseball today when it comes to the acceptance and treatment of women reporters. And through your lens of history with this game, which is immense, how would you characterize the change or progress that you've seen from when you were covering sports for the Washington Post to when Chelsea's doing so now? And at that time, often your eye was attuned to the societal role that baseball played, because you were taking that game and putting it on the style pages of the Washington Post. So kind of take a mesh of that and give a sense of where you think we're going with change and progress.
I'm actually fairly concerned, and not just for the women on this panel and the women covering baseball altogether. I think I can't imagine, Chelsea, how hard it is to be doing this job in the era of COVID, where MLB and teams have used Zoom as a way to restrict more access, not just to women, but God knows we know the women will go first. And to do it at a time as, when the story is becoming all numerical. In fact, that's what I'm writing about, is what the hell is wrong with baseball? How did it happen? And what do we do about it? And that's why I want to talk to you all. I told Melissa this story. This is the one she said, was okay for me to say. And I read Roger Angel's seminal account of the first women, led by Melissa, who got into locker rooms, starting with in 1977 with her suit against the Yankees and Major League Baseball, because Yankee Stadium was built on public ground and therefore they couldn't restrict access, couldn't restrict women from having access, whereas they did succeed in doing it in Philadelphia, for example, at least initially. The day, and one of the days that Melissa was banished, I was at the game, it was during the 77 World Series, and I saw her being pushed aside among the riffraff, and knowing that everybody else in the world, I think Don Rickles was there that day, for God's sake, everybody was in the locker room, but so was I. And I didn't want to embarrass her by saying, here, she did the legendary thing. She made the world possible for all of us. And while she was like being buffeted, I snuck under the Pinkerton guard's arm. And so there I was talking to Reggie, who tells me now he doesn't remember me, doesn't know me, and hangs up on me. Okay, that's the way it goes. The point of the story being that we've always had to go, or, you can go by the rules, sure, rules suck. And reporters who are good at what they do find a way to get to the people, get beyond the numbers, get beyond the stats, get beyond the stat heads, and get into where it's happening. I think it's getting harder. And I'm grateful that I write mostly about dead people, because they're easier to get to actually these days than live athletes. But I'm quite concerned about not just the future of where women covering the game goes, but where the game goes, period. And maybe if I want to be optimistic, maybe the stories that Chelsea and Alex and Jessica tell and Suzyn can find some new ones, if they'll ever let us back in, can show the human development. I mean, guys keep saying, Lindor keeps saying, Theo keeps saying, we want to put the game back in the hands of the players. Well, that means putting the game back in the hands of human beings. And maybe the women writing about the game and writing about it with our particular perspective and the consciousness of the humanity of these people, and that, that's really what happens in the deciding moment. It isn't, how many times for the order the pitcher is thrown. It isn't this, it's what one person can do. What is most terrifying to me about the way the game is being played now is that those moments are missing. If Sandy Koufax, were playing under today's mores and rules, no one would have let him pitch Game 7 of the '65 World Series on 2 days rest with an elbow that was shredded. It wouldn't happen. And what would we all have missed? Not just him, the opportunity to find out what he was capable of, but us to have a story that we would tell for decades afterwards. And so that's my concern. So you girls, go for it.
Excellent. Well, we're going to go to Alex and Jessica next, but you do remind me of those times where I was shut out and kept out. And you're right. We did find ways around it if we were a good reporter. I think I was a good reporter. So Reggie was clearly the main part of the story on that team. As he said, he was the straw that stirred the drink. And so when I couldn't get into the locker room, I got into his Rolls Royce on Fifth Avenue and rode up to the game with him every day. I would meet him at the garage. He'd pick me up as his Rolls Royce drove out. He'd be in the driver's seat. I'd sit in the passenger seat, and I would have time with him by myself. So, but anyway, enough of that.
Ask me to talk to me, please.
Enough of that. Alex. So I'm going to try to bring in another dimension with you at this.
Bye, everybody. Got to run.
Bye,
Okay,
Jane.
bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
You wrote an essay this year in The Athletic, the past January, when your younger sister became the 12th overall pick in the National Women's Soccer League draft. You have an amazing family, by the way. I mean, just think about this for a moment. And she got picked by the one team that she wanted to play for. It was just a glorious, joyful moment. And you write about what it was like for you two to be sisters and having these experiences. So I'm wondering if you can bring into your discussion on this topic of change and progress, how what's happening with women athletes on the fields and on the courts and on the rinks is connected to the progress that you're seeing or the changes that you're seeing in terms of women like yourself, in terms of telling the stories about these games.
Well, honestly, in writing that story, the first thing that comes to mind is, the competitiveness that we felt as like two females that were in the sports space, even if we were in different positions in that space. And when I think about the notion of progress, I think about, sure, there are more female sports writers and there are more female broadcasters and athletes, but, I still get the sense that, and I think many females still get the sense that there's a limited amount of space for us here. And I think it makes it harder for some to support the others, and that was the case with me and my sister. I mean, it was never like something that we said to each other, but I think, throughout our earlier years, we definitely had there was a reluctance to kind of embrace each other's successes. And now, we've finally seen the light and are able to do that. And I'm thrilled for her and her career in the NWSL, future career. But, even two people that are blood relatives, if they can have that kind of dynamic, I can say for a fact that it definitely exists within the sports industry. So I think that that's another barrier to future progress, is when there are a limited amount of spots. If you're only hiring one female on the national desk, or one, if there's only one spot or two spots, then it makes it harder for us to support each other. So that's what comes to mind when I hear that.
No, that's an excellent observation, and one I think would be, I see people nodding, and I know Suzyn and I have talked about that. many times. Jessica, I'm going to let you close it out because you're the one who people are going to start seeing and hearing as ESPN starts its several days of coverage leading up to the All-Star game on Tuesday, and you're going to be part of that broadcast team. So like a lot of male broadcasters, and you touched on this a little earlier, you have certainly won enormous plaudits for your play on the sports field from college through professional softball before you transitioned into this role as a baseball analyst. So as we think about change and progress, I'd like to hear from you about whether you feel that the sports broadcast industry appears open at this point to having more women who played sports at high competitive levels sitting in the seats in the network broadcast booths. Because of course, back in my day, the knock against any woman covering any sports was that she'd never competed in the game. And because we never had the opportunities to do the competitiveness, well, of course we didn't. Then Title IX came along, so it's opened up these opportunities. So when a woman back then was considered qualified for a job in a sports broadcasting arena, she'd been a beauty queen. That was her qualification. And that has obviously changed. So where are we today? Can you kind of give us a summation as we sort of, kind of close out our conversations today on that part of our...
Well, it's interesting. When I was first asked to get involved in television, I mean, my background at Stanford, I had gotten my master's in social sciences and education. I was going to get involved in politics, move to DC, and I wanted to work on educational reform. I mean, that's where I was headed, and I was still on the Olympic team. But when I was first approached about being on television, my reaction was what you just said, Melissa. I'm like, first of all, I don't have the background. I didn't have a journalism major. I mean, everything about me is like, you have to have your ducks lined up, all the research, the preparation. I didn't have that background. So I was like, there's no way. And at that point, it was still in that transitional period where I was like, I barely brush my hair. I don't even wear makeup. Like, I see the women that are on television and they are these beauty queens, and that's awesome. But like, that's not me. Like, my hair's in a ponytail and I wear workout clothes every day. Like, so this isn't, and so to be able to come into television and have there be this understanding of like, it's about what you say and it's about your knowledge and not your looks. And there still is that pressure, definitely. And you hear it from men or you hear it online. Like, I don't care because that's not me, but I think we're definitely transitioning. I see Candace Parker on basketball, Julie Foudy, who I'm a huge fan of, the Euros that are still going on, hearing her on men's soccer and just killing it. I mean, that's the biggest thing is you have these athletes that, yes, why wouldn't they not only be calling women's sports, but to be honest, Melissa, it occurred to me when John Kruk came and did the Women's College World Series with me. So I'm sitting there with an ex-Major League Baseball player who, guess what, never played college softball. And he did an awesome job of breaking down hitters. And because he understood the game and he cared and he had stories because he got to know the females on the field and that passion. And all of a sudden it clicked with me. It was like, why can't I do the reverse? He can come into my game. Why can't I go sit next to him in a booth and do the same thing? And this passion came inside of me that was like, and he did a great job of it. I want to be able to do this. And it was crazy how long it did take. I mean, maybe not, I get it, everything that we've done, but that it wouldn't just be a yes. But what we are seeing now, and what makes me so happy, is I talk to so many college softball players when I'm doing the Women's College World Series, and all of them want to do television. They're all like, this is what I want as a next, and not even baseball. They just want to get involved in television sports because they've played and they see that path now. And I think it's huge that we continue to do a really good job. It's an important thing because where the supermodel that was doing television before, sometimes it's a dime a dozen, like, you see a different woman every month. We're here to stay. And that's something that when I first started Sunday Night Baseball is I wanted to continue to be able to do baseball on television. I did not want it to be a one-off. And that's my fear, I think, this last year is we're seeing a lot of trend of like, we're going to put a female in the booth one time. We're going to put a female, doing all these different roles for the first time, the Cubs, all these different things. Okay, well, a month from now, I want to see her again. And I want to see her again. And hire the right women and make sure that it's something that we're continuing to do because they're good and not because we're checking a box because it's a movement.
Yeah.
And that's probably my thing. And the last thing I'm going to say is this is where the progress I feel like has not happened. We have to change the environment in the clubhouse to where the women that are, when you ask Chelsea about young girls that are watching and want to be in this, please, can we make it to where that path is never hindered? Because these women are going to get harassed. They're going to get approached to come follow me in the bedroom. Listen, when you tell me about going in the Rolls Royce, like, even though like that was totally professional, and like, it's awful that there's times that the only way to get access for these men is to be like, well, come over here. Or like right now, only having Zooms. I don't have players' phone numbers. Like I can't do that because they get the wrong impression. And we need to change that to where I'm a professional and I want to be able to talk to you. I want to be able to get information without you thinking about having sex with me or how you want to, approach me in a different way. So I think all these young girls that are coming up, that's where the progress, I don't believe, has happened at all. And it makes me sick to my stomach to think about everything that's happened over the course of this year alone, because finally more women are speaking out, which I'm so grateful for. But please, like Major League Baseball, we have to change this and not react to it. It's got to be proactive. So these girls that are going to be women in this space aren't hindered by that on top of everything else.
Jessica, if I can add one.
Sure,
You
absolutely,
bring up a
Suzyn.
great point. There's one more thing. It's the people that are giving the assignments, the people that are putting these shows together. I did in March. It was a fine show on MLB about women in baseball, and it was supposed to be a celebration. It was produced by a man. I'm sorry. It's just, it happens over and over and over. And it was the last day of March, and now they could go back to being what they were. We've got to have more women not be scared of working behind the scenes. Having a woman at the desk who gives the assignment so that every time somebody's mother is at the game, there's not a female broadcaster sitting in the stands, go talk to somebody's mother. That is something that, that is just, it's fine to talk to somebody's mother, but why is it always the woman that has to do that? Because it's considered a soft story. The behind the scenes, Kim Ang, by the way, had her first interview 15 years before she got this. I've known her since 1998. She was a star then, she was a star now, and she will be really, really successful. But it took her all this time to do that because who is making the decisions? The other thing, Jessica, and I've seen this and I'm seeing it everywhere now, they pit women against each other. Back when we started, if you saw another woman walk into your office or your radio station or your network, one of you wasn't going to be there. And I don't think that's changed at all. I mean, there might be a couple of different people now, but that is the idea that women are still to this day pitted against each other is something that is going to be blocking us forever because you want to help. And I think there's a special place in hell for women that don't help other women, but you want to help. But then when you're saying, she's going to take my job, I'm not ready to be pushed out yet because she's prettier than me and she's younger. So you fight. And those of us who are around a long time know how to fight. And that's why we stay here. So those are the things, the people that give the assignments, and the idea that anytime something soft happens, we got to get a girl in there because she'll know how to do it. I mean, that's the thing that has stopped us, I think, in the 35 years that I've been here.
Way to say it, both of you. Michaela, I just want to do one quick lightning round, pay forward, and then we'll be off. Okay, guys, gals, guys, whatever we use is that term. Name a woman sports writer or broadcaster or woman author of a book that might not be as well known as we are, who hasn't had the opportunity to speak now, but you want to draw attention to her work, what she does, who she is. So people listening, who, if they want to see and learn more about what women in this world are doing in baseball, they can go look. So just a lightning round, name one other person other than the people in this room who you want to draw attention to. Who wants to go first? Jessica.
I would say, gosh, there's so many. if it's lightning round, Jen Schroeder, who she's writes and blogs and does a ton. This is softball space, but entering baseball too. She's great role model, got her own business. So I would say her. Look her up.
Jen Schroeder. Jen Schroeder. Okay, yeah. Who's up next? Chelsea?
Yeah, I mean, I think Suzyn knows this well too, but I think Lindsay Adler from The Athletic does a tremendous job and asks the best questions in the game, and I tell her that all the time. And it's no coincidence that she comes up with things that the men on that really competitive beat don't. And I think she really has unveiled a lot of things that they wouldn't have otherwise. Great.
Alex?
I think I'm going to go with, and I know she's already been mentioned, but Hannah Kaiser of Yahoo Sports. When Chelsea was talking about the Mickey Callaway stuff, I thought of a press conference that she was in. It was a Mets press conference, I think, with Sandy Alderson. And I'm pretty sure she was the one that asked the question, whether or not they vetted his hiring by any women, which is a great question. And they hadn't. So just, she's great, I think, at bringing that fresh perspective and doing it in a really eloquent way.
Great. And aside from the 7 women in your photograph, Suzyn, who you feel are the future that are coming up through minor league baseball, do you have someone to point us to?
Well, of those 7, one is out there. Her name is Melanie Newman, and she has been given the awful job of doing twice a week games and doing pre and post also in the Orioles. There's one girl her name is Emma Tiedman, and she is at Portland. She's at the Portland Sea Dogs. She's the real deal. And she is going to be she's the first female that I've ever heard. And I heard her tapes in college. And she's going to be the first female that you're going to say, oh, she's pretty good for a girl. You're not going to say that about her. You're not going to know she's a female, except that she is a female. Her name is Emma Tiedman, and watch for her. She will be the next big star.
That's great. Well, thank you all for taking us through this hour. I mean, my God, fascinating and wonderful. And it's just been great to meet many of you for the first time. And I'm sure that the people who are listening in learned a lot, as I did today. So thank you. And thanks for paying it forward by mentioning those names. So over to you.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you all once again. As a female who is just an observer of baseball, I don't really do the stats, but my brother played college ball. We love it. This is inspiring and amazing. And just as a female in the workplace, it's really encouraging to hear. So thank you for your contributions. I'm going to do a very, very quick round robin to just remind people who you are, where they can find you online, so that everybody can know your names and follow you as well. So Melissa, our moderator, if you could just start us off.
Hi, Melissa Ludtke, and I used to write for Sports Illustrated, and I'm now actually writing a book about my federal lawsuit to gain access for women into the locker rooms in the 1970s. And hopefully it'll be out sometime next year, called Locker Room Talk, A Woman's Struggle to Get Inside.
Jessica?
Jessica Mendoza. I am an analyst for ESPN. I'll also be in the Olympics at the Olympics next week for NBC, doing softball and baseball. You can find me on Twitter at Jess Mendoza or Instagram at Jess Mendoza too. And I'm just super pumped to be with these amazing women.
Alex?
Alex Coffey. I just spent 2 years at The Athletic, and now I'm a freelance writer based out of New York City. You can find my bylines all over the place, and it's probably best to just go to my Twitter feed at @AlexCoffey.
And Suzyn?
I'm Suzyn Waldman. I'm the color commentator for the New York Yankees. I do have an Instagram account, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not online. So you're just going to have to listen to the Yankees radio network. Alex and Chelsea, this has just been a treat for me to actually meet you. Jess, I love you. You know that. And Melissa, thank you. We've been friends forever. I hope it goes on forever. Thank you all. This has been great.
Yep.
And last but not least, Chelsea.
I'm Chelsea James from the Washington Post. I cover national baseball and everything going on with that. And I am at Chelsea_James on Twitter. Proceed at your own risk with that because the puns are plentiful.
We also had Jane Leavy on this as well. She'll be joining us later for another event. check out our website, tattercover.com/event for more baseball themed events this week. We're so excited. Jessica, we're excited to have you in Denver.
I'm coming. Can I come by the store?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I need to make sure I come
right
by.
across the street. It is right across the street.
I'm there. I'm there tomorrow.
Yay! Well, we thank you all so much for joining us. I'm McKaylee with Tattered Cover Bookstore. Stay safe, everybody. Happy reading, and thank you for shopping locally.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You ladies are awesome.
Bye.
Seriously.